Welcome to the Strength and Dignity podcast, where we discuss Christian lifestyle, scripture, biblical concepts, and hear testimonies from various guests. I'm your host, Kelsey Pryor, and I hope you find encouragement, solid teaching, and thought-provoking concepts here. We're entering into a new series called Christian Lifestyle. This is a series where we discuss practical tips, biblical commands, and various teachings throughout scripture that can be applicable to anybody. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a future podcast. All right, let's get started. Hey guys, welcome back to the Strength and Dignity podcast. I am super excited to have Sharon here today. She runs a blog called You Are a Creative Force and has lots of really awesome insight, very, very practical on just creativity in general. And so I'm super excited to hear about her testimony. It's all very faith-based, and I'm a super creative person. I love writing. I love sewing. I love just dreaming up all kinds of ideas. My family gets sick and tired of it. So I'm really excited to hear all the gold that you have for us today. And so even if you you are a super creative person, or if you think you're not a creative person, this episode is going to be for you because Sharon has some awesome stuff she's going to share with us today. So, hello, Sharon. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Kelsey.
I'd love to just dive into your story, your testimony, kick us off, and then we'll dive into your blog and everything you have going on over there.
Awesome. It sounds good. Thank you so much for having me on this show. It's such a privilege to be here. Like she said, I'm Sharon. I have a blog. It's called Your Creative Force. And I also work full-time as a video editor. And I accepted Jesus in my heart when I was 4 years old. I grew up in a Christian family, so I accepted Jesus in my heart when I was really young, but it wasn't really until I was older that became like a personal relationship for me. So after high school, I went to YWAM, Youth with a Mission. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but essentially it's a program that like trains up young people to go into missions. And that's really when I realized that I could hear God's voice and that he wants to speak to us. And so that was really, I would say, like the start of my relationship with God.
That's awesome. That's super cool. I just got finished interviewing my best friend, Naomi, and she's over at YWAM in Kona, Hawaii right now.
Okay.
So I get to hear a lot about YWAM through her. So that's super awesome.
Yeah.
Did you do like a DTS?
I did. YWAM was such an amazing experience for me. I definitely recommend it. So my base was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I did a DTS, and I went to Argentina, Chile, and Peru.
Wow, that's awesome. All in the same 3 months, or were those all different trips?
It was all in the same 3 months. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That's so cool. I bet, share with us like a story or two of like anything that like really impacted you, or a way that you saw God move while you were there.
Yeah, honestly, I saw God do so many things during that time. I think like I said, that was really when like God became so real and alive to me, because we would just spend time in the morning just in his presence, and then we would go out and we would just like minister to people. And there's just so many people whose like lives were changed, like people were healed. I just remember one testimony of we were actually going door to door to people's houses, which is not something you probably do in the US, but we went to this lady's house, and she had actually was not supposed to be there. She was supposed to be at work, but she had just felt like she was just supposed to stay home that day. And she was just going through like a really hard time. And we were able to like pray for her and minister and just completely change her outlook. And she was just so blessed by it. So just like being able to do stuff like that, it was really cool.
That's so cool. That's awesome. Those providential moments are always so like, there is a God and you're amazing.
Yeah. And he cares so much like to send people from like across the world to like go to her house to like pray for her that day. Like that's how much he cares.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool. That's awesome. I love that you got to experience that. How cool. Awesome. Well, let's dive into a little bit of what led you to where you are right now. So we're going to talk about your content and, creativity in general. I want to hear your whole spiel on that. But is there like any story or something like leading up to, I don't know, if when you had the vision to have a blog like this, like maybe describe that process to us.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a pretty long story and a pretty long journey. I have always really just enjoyed like everything creative. I've like always like when I was a little kid, like I wanted to be an actress in Hollywood. That was actually like my main like thing. And so I've always loved like film and painting, photography, acting, all of those things. And really, I tried to go about it in like my own strength. And
Hmm.
after YWAM, I went to a 4-year university. I figured I would like study theater. I'd like move to Hollywood and just kind of like pursue things, what I thought was like the best route. And honestly,
Hmm.
like it felt like I was like treading through like mud, like trying to do
Wow.
things like in my own strength. Like it was just so difficult.
Hmm.
Um, and what happened for me actually, I had kind of like just really lost like all of like the passion to like pursue that. During my time in college, I kind of just really like grew really distant from God, kind of like lost my
Hmm.
sense of purpose, like lost the sense of like who I was. And I was just like really struggling. And something like that really happened that was pivotal in my life was I had someone randomly send me a teaching on Facebook. And they were like, hey, like I really felt like God was telling me to send this to you. And I was like, okay. I actually didn't listen to it at that moment, but I later clicked on it. And that teaching, I felt like God was speaking directly to me through that. And
Hmm.
it completely just changed like my relationship with God and everything. And it actually led me to go to Bible college. So
Wow.
yeah. So this is a
That's
kind of like
amazing.
long story, but in Bible college is where um, they actually started like a creative arts program there, which when I went, like that wasn't even on the horizon. And that's really where God like reignited like that passion in my heart and just really showed me like that this was his purpose for me all
Hmm.
along. And he also just through that just showed me that he has a better way of doing things, that when we follow his
Hmm.
voice and like don't do things in our own strength, it is seriously so effortless. I have just had like doors open for me and connections, and it's just been so easy when I'm just following God and knowing that I'm in the center of like where he wants me to be. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
That's so cool. I
Yeah,
love
there's like
that. I one
a
of
long answer.
No, I love it. That's great. One of my favorite quotes, I don't remember if it's an actual quote or just something someone said once, but the safest place to be is inside of God's will. And so I feel
Amen.
like that it's kind of like hand in hand with like the safest place to be is inside his will, but also like the place where you're in the palm of his hands and he's in control of everything. And that, like you said, that's when those doors start to open. So that's really cool. I love that. Yeah, so dive into your blog. Like, tell us about it. What's it all about? What inspired you to start it? And what can you tell other people about creativity? I guess we could start. How would you define creativity, first off?
Yeah, so I think my definition of creativity, it might surprise some people. So I believe that creativity is essentially what God has given all of us. It is innate within us, and it is the ability to use our imagination to come up with ideas, and then we have the ability to bring those things into existence into this world. And
That's
so
awesome.
people think like, oh, like I'm not creative. And it's like, no, like that is something that God has given every single one of us. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have to mean like maybe you don't consider yourself to be like good at like painting or dancing or different things like that. And really all of those things I think are things that are skills that we learn through practice and applying ourselves. But the ability to be creative is something that God has given all of us. And you're like, we are creative.
Yeah, that's great. And it's a way that we're made in his image, right? Like, that's one of his
Exactly.
biggest.
Yeah,
Yeah, like the whole creation story, like everything that we see around us, shows not only his creativity, but inspires our own creativity. It stems from his original creation, and that's super, super cool to think about. So yeah, so tell us about your creative force.
yeah. So I actually, the blog, I actually had a prophecy. Someone gave me a prophecy five
Mm.
years ago. and they were like, you're going to have a blog and it is going to impact women. And at the time, like I was really interested in blogging, and it was a desire that I had in my heart. So I was like super excited to get this prophecy. I was like, yay, it's confirmed. But it really just wasn't the time to like start it. I was really still going through like a preparation season. So actually the blog, it got started about like a year ago. And even just the name for the blog is something that God spoke to me. He said, you are a creative force. And I was like, oh, like that's cool. But like when I really asked God, like explain that to me, like what does that mean? Like that's when he showed me that, like, I have given every person, like, you're here for a reason and for a purpose. And I've given every person like ideas that they're supposed to bring forth into this world. And the force part is really just to have an impact in this world. And so being a creative force is just simply being a person that brings forth the things that God has like placed in your heart to have an impact. So that's like
That's
how it
super
all came
cool.
about.
Yeah, I love that. Especially the part when you said you've always had like a desire for it, but you were in a season of preparation. I think that a lot of people have, I mean, myself included, have a passion or desire for something, either bigger or just more complicated or something than they like best case scenario, this is what my life would look like. And they're just not ready for it yet. Either they aren't or the world around them isn't. And God has them in a different place and it can be kind of confusing. What would you say to that person who's in this like season of preparation? Like if you saw, looking back on it, what value did you see from that? What do you feel like God was able to teach you in that prepared you for the place that he has you right now?
Yeah, it's funny because like at my Bible college, one of the teachers, he says preparation time is never wasted time. And yeah, and it's just so true. Because when you allow yourself, especially just allowing yourself to like sit in the presence of God and like hear from him and hear like the path that he wants you to go, you're going to be able, when you get that clear direction, you're going to be able to go quicker and you're going to be able to accelerate faster than if you weren't prepared, if that makes sense. Like, or if you just stepped out in like your
Yeah.
own strength.
Yeah. You're going to hit the ground running that way.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. So, what would you say to someone who doesn't know how they have this, like, they have a vision for what they want, like you did, and they're either afraid to start it or they don't know, am I still being prepared? Like, what can I do to push myself one step closer to my dream? What would you say to that person?
Yeah. So, I was just talking about preparation, and I think like sometimes there is like that preparation, but then I think a lot of times we get into that place where like we're almost like using that or like God as an excuse to not get started. And
Oh,
it's like we
yeah.
know like it's time and we're just like fearful for whatever reason. And I
Mm-hmm.
would say, like, I mean, it sounds maybe cliche, but just start, like, just do it.
Mm.
And to break that down, like, I think a lot of people, they get overwhelmed because they're looking at the big picture and they're looking off into the future of what it is
Mm-hmm.
that God has for them. And you don't have to go from A to Z, you just have to go from A to B. So, really, just what is like the next step that you can be faithful in, and the next thing that
Mm.
you can step into to start heading down that path of like what God has for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes it can be a little dangerous when you have this vision that feels like just a dream and then suddenly it becomes a reality and you get scared.
Yeah.
And then you almost feel like this conviction come over you where if you don't take that step, it's almost disobedience. Like
Yeah.
that's actually what God's asking you to step out into. And if you're not doing that, then it's in direct disobedience of what he's asking you to do. But that can be scary for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, it really can be scary. I think that like I was definitely getting prepared for starting my blog, but then there was like a part of time where I was also just like fearful. Like I was just yeah, I was just nervous. And so it can definitely be scary. There's something that God spoke to me in the Bible, and I actually like wrote a blog post about it. And it comes from Second Kings, chapter 7. And it's a story about four lepers, and the Israel is like under attack, and these four lepers are sitting there and they're starving. And one of them says, like, why sit here until we die? And like when I read that, like, sometimes when you read the scriptures, like it just pops off the page to you. Like it just came
Mm-hmm.
alive to me. And I just felt like the Holy Spirit was telling me, like, Sharon, like, what areas are you like sitting in that I've told you to like move forward in? And
Mm-hmm.
the cool thing in that story is that those like four men decided, like, okay, we're not going to sit here until we die. We're going to go to like the enemy's camp and see if like perhaps like that gives us a chance of survival. And when they did that, like God actually moved with them. And I think that's like the really cool thing is that when we step out in faith, like God like moves with us. And like the whole like enemy camp like fled because like God made it sound like a great army was coming there. And so I hope that just
Wow.
like encourages people um to just not be fearful, but just to take that step of
Mm-hmm.
faith and God's going to go with you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great action item. I love that. I'm curious if you've seen any, like, what is the fruit or the life change or the, like the, yeah, I guess the fruit would be the right word, come out of your blog or content that you put out there or places that you've spoken at?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm really honestly just in the beginning stages. And the encouraging thing about that is like God says, don't despise the day of small beginnings. Uh,
Yes.
yeah. So like that's so encouraging. So I mean, it is really meaningful to me because like I will have like people like write me like on Instagram or like just respond to like a post and just tell me like that really encouraged them and that helps
Mm-hmm.
them. And so I really just like look forward to more people like just hearing what like the Lord has to say, and hopefully like it just sets them free, because for me, like this blog essentially is like what I was looking for. Like I
Mm-hmm.
would read like content that was like talking about succeeding, but like none of it incorporated the Bible. And so like
Oh,
it was
yeah.
just like, yeah, it was just the world. So like I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to take something that was like practical steps, but also like what the Bible has to say. And so
Well, that's super encouraging. I think there's so many, you're right, there's so many resources out there that are either very spiritual and vague or very worldly and practical. So finding that medium of being able to bring the two together and have something like spiritual and practical to bring to the table is such a gift. Yeah.
yeah, it's so important because I think that like for so long, like the church is just like kept I don't know, like it's kept like our faith separate, or like, like this is church,
Mm-hmm.
but really like our faith impacts every area of our lives. Like it should impact our businesses, it should
Absolutely.
impact like the things that we're doing. So yeah, I just really love like the combination and tying those two things together.
Yeah, that's super cool. I love that you can do that and that you have a way to share it with other people. I think that's super valuable. So tell us a little bit about what you have written. Like what's maybe one of the favorite things that you've written on your blog?
Yeah, I think one of the posts that I wrote like is called "Becoming Your Biggest Cheerleader," and it's
Mm.
actually from First Samuel 36 is like what inspired me to write it. I like have a personality, like I'm an extrovert, like I love people, and so I have this tendency to kind of sometimes just depend on people and depend on
Mm.
people like too much. And so um the story in that like blog post, King David, his men, like they went back to their city, and their city had been like burned down, and like their wives and their children had been kidnapped. And all of his like soldiers and men, they were so discouraged that they like were like, we're gonna stone you, we're gonna kill you. And it says that like David encouraged himself in the Lord. And that really
Mm.
spoke to me because like there's times where whatever we're doing, like we might come against roadblocks and we might feel like giving up. But in that moment, that's when we like go to the Lord and we find that encouragement, and we don't have to depend on like other people or outside sources, but really it's just like our relationship with God, and like we can be encouraged through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in a world that doesn't like to accept Christianity, which the world's always been like that, but the culture is a little bit different now than it maybe has been in the past. So, encountering that and not being discouraged and like encouraging yourself in the Lord, I like that. That's
Yeah.
super helpful, especially for discouraging times. Like right now can feel kind of discouraging. We're right in the middle of Corona right now, and every day is, we take it one day at a time. You don't really know what's coming next. but encouraging yourself in the Lord and finding your roots and your hope in him is always a super great reminder. But it's super funny that you actually brought up the difference between like practical, like separating the practical from the spiritual, and how you want to like bring those together, because that's actually what stood out to me when I was scrolling through just the names of your blog posts. I thought, wow, this is like a really good balance of like solid biblical teaching and like something super practical. So like 4 of the titles that stood out to me are How to Grow Your Capacity, which I really like. That one was a little bit more like spiritual, but it was obviously very practical because of the way you need to use your capacity. How and Why to Make a Vision Board. Like, that's super practical. Like, I loved that. And then Avoiding Victim Mentality. That's like a super deep one. And then How to Get Inspiration for New Ideas. Like, that's just, sometimes people are stuck in that rut. So being the person that can kind of breathe a bridge between those two, I love that you've found a way to do that, and that's super encouraging. So
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. How can people find your blog or find the content that you're putting out there?
Yeah, so people can find my blog at youareacreativeforce.com, and that's all spelled out. And then they can follow on Facebook too. I have a Facebook page, facebook.com/youareacreativeforce. And then also my Instagram is at Sharon Stark. And so, yeah, people can
Awesome.
read along there.
Yeah, and talk about the freebie that you have to offer, the Uncover Your Purpose and Live Your Passion freebie.
Yeah, so if people want to subscribe, I have a free download, and it's what you said, the Uncover Your Purpose and Live Your Passion. And really, it's just kind of like a step-by-step guide to help people kind of like uncover like the things that they really enjoy doing, and also just spending time with the Lord to like hear what he has to say
Mm-hmm.
about their purpose. So I think people will really get a lot out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the way that you said that made me think your creativity doesn't have to be some sort of public display, like if you
Mm-hmm.
don't want it to be. Like if you don't want to be publishing a blog, but you want to be writing, or if you don't want to be like a singer on a stage, but you like to worship. Things like that, where you can either be using your creativity just to steward the gift that God gave everybody, whatever your version of creativity is that he gave you, or to minister to him. It doesn't have to be something that you give to everybody if you're not in a place to like give that. So and everyone has that purpose and passion that they like, are either like we talked about, are either like afraid of or haven't
Mm-hmm.
like really drilled
Yeah.
down and nailed down yet, but they know it's out there. So awesome. I encourage everyone to head over to Sharon's blog, see what she has to offer. It's some really great stuff. Thank you so much for joining us today and for offering your wisdom and your insight. And I loved hearing about how God has moved through your life in the different seasons. Like you had YWAM, you had college, you had Bible school, you had Hollywood. You had quite the gambit. You've been able to like go all those different seasons. So that's really cool. So thank you so much for joining us today, Sharon.
Thank you, Kelsey. This is really fun. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Strength and Dignity. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook and sign up for our newsletter to be notified of all the fun stuff we have rolling out. All the links can be found in the description below. Hope you tune in next time.